Well, thanks for joining us. Again, this is week 22 of our study of Revelation, and we're going to focus on chapter 14 tonight. Now, chapter 14 actually continues this interlude that's going on. There's an interlude between the seven trumpets before the seven bowls start. And so when the seventh trumpet was sounded, it brought us right kind of like to the very end times. But before that actual coming of the end, John has given us some more visions which represent to him kind of the end time, and it's eventually going to be the final battle stream between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. And this struggle really has been going on forever. And in chapter 12, we had some imagery there which it kind of portrayed that. We had the dragon fighting against the woman. It was against the people of God. And then last week we looked at 13. In chapter 13, we had the emergence of the beast, which we know from other places is the Antichrist, who is trying to do everything possible to get the people that are loyal to God to be disloyal to God and to keep the unbelievers from putting their faith in Jesus. And so this interlude, and we're still in that, is right before the outpouring of the bowls of God's wrath and the coming end. And John, once again, is wanting to spend some time reassuring the believers that even though wickedness and the godless civilization of the beast are there, they are going to come under divine judgment, and the saints will be brought into eternal salvation. And so in chapter 14, it's kind of like, wow, 12 and 13 have been a bit downers. So 14, he wants to once again encourage them with some things. And so 14 really is a series of several smaller, shorter visions. And these together are really designed to encourage God's people to be faithful. So I'm going to, as usual, read the whole chapter through, and then we'll go back through and we'll work through it verse by verse. So let me go ahead and read it all the way through. Chapter 14. John says, "Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remain virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those people who lived on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, 'Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and the springs of water.' A second angel followed and said, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations to drink the maddening wine of her adulteries.' A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their foreheads or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They'll be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There'll be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus.' And then I heard a loud voice from heaven say, 'Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on.' Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then the angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, 'Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe.' So he who was seated on the cloud swung a sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe. The angel swung a sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and the blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Okay, so that's the whole chapter. Now we're going to kind of go back through it and work through it verse by verse. And so let's look at that first verse and get going. The striking quality of this vision is kind of like it jumps out there with those opening words. I looked, and there before me. So it's like all of a sudden, John sees the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, accompanied by the 144,000 who bear his name in the name of the Father on the forehead. And this really is a scene that's meant to be in contrast to the beast of chapter 13, because in chapter 13, the beast followers are stamped with his mark, 666, on their right hand or on their forehead. And if you remember back in chapter 5, the Lamb was counted worthy to open up the seals. And in chapter 7, he receives praise of multitude of people in heaven. And now once again, you see the Lamb standing victorious with his followers. In this verse vision of the ones that are in chapter 14, it's a picture of the destiny of the people of God who preserve themselves and during the final tribulation and have not fallen prey to and some of them who've fallen prey to the wrath of the beast. Some of these have actually died. The vision really is kind of like a foretaste, because we're going to see this again in chapters 20 and 22. But what John often does is give kind of anticipatory visions of what is yet to be done. And he almost describes them as if they've already been done, because we're yet to see some of the wrath poured out on the beast and some of that time in which these people were persecuted. Now, it's fitting that the Lamb should be standing on Mount Zion, for that sacred place had long been associated with divine deliverance. In fact, we can read these verses in Joel that talks about it. Now, these verses in Joel, right before these verses, Joel's talking about the great and terrible day of the Lord. But here's what he says in verse 32. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, for on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as the Lord has said, even among the survivors whom the Lord calls. So basically it's a vision here that John has. And notice in this vision, he's seeing the 144,000 and they are on Mount Zion. And there's other places in the Bible that kind of helps us to picture this as kind of a symbolic place. Hebrews 12:22 says, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly. And then in Galatians 4:26, it says, but the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. So this passage is talking about a heavenly scene in which those that have died, those that have been faithful to Jesus to the very end, are in Christ's presence. Now, some commentators want to think this is part of the earthly millennium, but really the entire scene is really one of praise that is before the throne in heaven. And so we want to look at and think of it as being that kind of a place. Now, the identity of the 144,000 has been variously interpreted, and also the relationship to the 144,000 in chapter 7. Verse 7 seems to set them, verse 4, let me jump ahead here to get verse 4. Verse 4 seems to set them apart as being some select group of super saints. And sometimes first fruits can talk about something that is part of a group that's consecrated to God in a special way, separate from the whole. And this talk about them being celibate also seems to indicate there's something special about them. And we're going to look at that more when we actually get further down into verse 3 and 5. But really, it's better to think of this group as the 144 as being the body of all the redeemed. Back in chapter 7, the 144 were sealed against the woes that laid ahead. It was kind of sealing of all of God's people. And now we have 144,000 here again. And it's kind of like God sealed 144,000 at the start of the period of great and intense tribulation. And that number is repeated at the end. And the point really is that none of God's people have been lost. They were sealed, and therefore they went through the tribulation. They went through the difficult time. And even though they were confronted by enemies on earth, they are now in heaven, and not one of them has been lost. On their foreheads is written the name of the Lamb and the name of the Father. And basically, this is basically just kind of a mark of allegiance. We've talked about sealing something to say who it belongs to, who you're devoted to, who you're aligned with. And those that bear the mark have committed themselves to the Lamb and the path of self-sacrificing love. They are the overcomers upon whom the risen Christ has written his own name. Let's see. Am I getting ahead here? Yeah, I am. I got a little bit ahead, didn't I? Let me go back there, because it also talks about the sounds that are coming from heaven. And I looked and I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters. And once again, John doesn't, you'll talk about hearing a voice, but he doesn't always talk about who's saying the voice. And so sometimes you'll get to know, is it God speaking or is it just somebody that God instructed to speak? Either way, it's basically saying it's something that is authoritative. And John is impressed by this voice because notice he describes it three ways: a roar like rushing waters, like a loud peal of thunder, and something like the sound of harps. All these things are just trying to say that it's something very melodious, something very attractive, something that would be appealing for people to listen to. All right, let me now get to verse 3. Then in Revelation 5:9, the 24 elders sang a new song, magnifying the Lamb who had ransomed them with his blood and to reign in his kingdom. It's actually not clear who's singing here. And so people would disagree. Some will say, no, it's the 144 that's singing. Others would say, no, it's angels are singing. Whichever it is, it's only the 144,000, not every person on earth, but only the 144,000 that get to learn the new song. For they alone of all the earth's inhabitants have experienced God's mighty deed of victory over the beast, and they were the ones that endured the suffering and the death. The 144 are now described basically with three figures intended to reveal both who they are and what characterizes them. They're described as virgins who've not defiled themselves with women. They are followers of the Lamb, and they are first fruits purchased among men. Now, there's a little bit of confusion there because it talks about virgins who've not defiled themselves with women. It's a little confusing if we take this figuratively, because oftentimes in the Bible, when it talks about virgins, it's speaking about females. And if this was talking about literal people, a group of people that include more men and women, then it would say that not defiled themselves, period, not just simply saying they defiled themselves with women. So a number of commentators basically want to say the 144,000 is an elite group who have attained some kind of spiritual status because they've renounced marriage and it's distracting sexual relationships. They are celibate and they are virgins. And, you know, there have always been people throughout church history who've exalted celibacy as if that's a pure and more spiritual way than other people. Jesus spoke with approval of eunuchs, those that had devoted themselves completely to God. And Paul wished everybody had the gift of self-denial that he had. The problem with this understanding, though, is that in the Bible, sexual relationships for a married couple are never thought of being as defiling or something that makes you impure. On the contrary, it's the clear teaching of the New Testament that from the beginning, God made people male and female for one another. And so holy matrimony, holy wedlock joins them together. And it's not supposed to be something that you look down on. And even though Paul thought it'd be great if people could be single to be devoted to God like he has, he held marriage in high esteem. And he uses marriage to describe the intimate relationship between Jesus and the church in Ephesians chapter 5. So it's unlikely that this is some spiritual elite group because it implies that something is second class or not good about being married. Another interpretation is try to say, well, it's not talking about being married or not married. It's just saying these are people that didn't commit adultery or didn't commit fornication. But again, why would that be singled out? Why would it be elevated above every other thing that somebody might do in order to be faithful to God? So probably it's better to think of this as a symbolism or description of them being virgins in the sense that they were spiritually faithful to God. And we see that happen lots of times in Scripture. In the Old Testament, Israel is described as a virgin. She's the virgin daughter of Zion. She's the virgin Israel. And whenever she lapses into idolatry, she's described as having played the harlot. And this figure gets carried over in the New Testament. In the Corinthians, Paul says to the Christians there, the church, I promise you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to hear. So we've got the 144,000 here, and they're probably pictured more as the promised bride of Christ as they wait the day of their marriage, and they've kept themselves pure from the defiling pagan world system of the beast. They resisted for the seductions of the great harlot of Rome and the kings and all the people that are trying to get them engaged in spiritual fornication by worshiping the beast and being devoted to money and being devoted to themselves more than God. Therefore, I think it's best to think of the 144,000 as virgins in the sense that they are spiritually pure. They've not fornicated in the sense of worshiping the beast. They've kept themselves pure by being devoted to God. So the second description, first description is that, they're virgins. The following is that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And the following here is not meant to think about they follow the Lamb as he kind of strolls around heaven, but they follow his life and instructions while they're still on earth. The statement echoes the words of Jesus that if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross. And we find that in all the Gospels. While the language not specifically address martyrdom, obviously a significant numbers of those who enter the final tribulation will end up being killed because of their faith in Jesus Christ. So the first figure stresses their fidelity, the fidelity of the redeemed to God. The second figure describes their discipleship in the sense that they follow Jesus because they're disciples of his. The third figure is they're purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. So we know they're purchased by Christ's blood. And then by being purchased by Christ's blood, they're offered to God as holy and pure sacrifice of first fruits. Now, first fruits gets used two different ways in Scripture. And one way, it might designate that initial gathering that a farmer has. And after that first gathering, there's going to be more to follow. So it may mean that they're a first fruit as a pledge or a down payment with more to follow. However, that's usually not the sense of the word in the Old Testament, although it can be seen in a few New Testament passages. However, in the Old Testament, the usual sense of a first fruit, and also sometimes the way it's done in the New Testament, it simply means an offering given to God. In other words, you have the whole offering and you have the whole bunch of a crop, and you separate out that part, that one separate part that goes to God. And that separate part that goes to God is holy and sanctified, and the rest is not holy and sanctified. So it's probably in the second sense that John thinks of this group of people as being that part out of all humanity that is like a first fruit that the Jews would take out of their harvest and give that first part to God, and the rest would be left behind. They're also described as being people that tell the truth because no lie was found in their mouths. They're blameless. And this is in contrast to what we're going to see later on in Revelation, where it describes those that are excluded from the eternal city. Evil people of every sort and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. So there's a big distinction between the people that follow Jesus and are truthful and those that are excluded because they practice falsehood. It can be said that no malice, no lie was found in their mouths. And that's unlike the pagans, because the pagans are people who exchange the truth of God for a lie. So they're basically saying that these are people who do not compromise and do not embrace the heretical claims of the Antichrist. The 144,000 are described as being blameless, which means they are beyond the reach of blame. And when used in the New Testament, this word generally means ethically blameless, not that they don't have any blemishes on their body like a blameless lamb would be, but it means that they're morally blameless. So it's interesting. You see, this vision of the Lamb and the 144,000 on Mount Zion follows a very distressing vision of two satanic beasts, which bring a surge of problems upon the world. And, basically what's going on here, it's saying, I've given you a bad vision because it's going to be a time of difficulty when the two beasts are there. But I want you to know to be joyful, to remain hopeful, because I want you to see what the end result is going to be, is that you will be part of God's people that will be with Jesus singing praises to God on Mount Zion. And so that vision should be there to kind of strengthen them, to say, endure, to keep at it, because even though your experience right now may not be like this, this is what's going to actually come. So that's the first of the visions that we have in chapter 14. Let's push on and look at the next vision. It has to do with three angels. And as we've already talked about, 14 consists of a series of visions that are kind of loosely associated, connected visions that are connected with the end. After the first vision of the final salvation of the redeemed, John hears an angel summoning all men to repentance while there's yet time before the last judgment, and it'll be too late. So it's like, okay, now we're not there yet. So we've got one more vision of we can give of angels telling people to repent. Now, why the angels called another one's not clear. I mean, some people say that's because the other angels were singing the new song, and so this is a different angel besides those. It's not really, didn't matter, and it's not mainly important. but he flew in mid-heaven, kind of like the zenith, so everyone could see him. And this message of this angel is addressed to those who dwell on the earth. And usually that's John's way of saying to unbelievers, to unregenerate human beings. And the angel addresses himself right now, not so much to the saints, not so much to the believers, but the unbelievers. And it's described as an eternal gospel. The worship of the beast and the unrepentance, this announcement is not going to really sound like a gospel because it's going to give a message of judgment to them. Yet the announcement really is good news, for we will see that this has to come, the judgment has to come to complete God's redemptive purpose. John had been writing to Christians who are facing persecution. And so for them, it's good news that eventually we're finally going to get to the point where their persecutors are going to be held accountable. They're going to have to give an account of the evil deeds they've done, and their evil power will eventually and finally come to an end. So the angel speaks in a loud voice, so his word can go out to all mankind. He calls on people to fear God. Evildoers, they have a lot to be afraid of when it comes to God. But the message is not basically a negative one, because he also calls on people to give glory to God and worship him. So it's kind of like, the focus on don't do that bad things, but do this good things, glorify God and worship him. And God is characterized as the creator of the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water. Those things are singled out. But everything that exists comes from the hand of God. Now, the worshipers of the beast, when they worship him, they're impressed by his power, but they should really recognize that they're in a hopeless position, because no matter how much power it seems like the beast has, God, the creator, has more power. A second angel goes out. And again, this is one of those visions or those announcements that is anticipation of the actual thing, because we're not going to see Babylon actually fall until chapter 7 and chapter 18. So we've got 15 and 16 there. So this is one of those things that John frequently does, where he talks about future events as if they've already happened. And he does this because he wants to reassure people that they really will happen. So describing them as indeed already happening is a way to say you can be confident, you can be 100% sure that what I'm talking about is what's going to happen. Babylon was the great enemy of Israel in Old Testament times. And here it stands for the capital of the final apostate civilization, that final antichrist civilization. It's a symbol of human society organized politically, economically, and religiously in opposition and in defiance to God. Babylon had embodied itself in a sense in first century Rome. And so that's why people, Jewish and Christian writers, would talk about Rome as being like Babylon, because Babylon basically just became a byword for whatever opposed God. And so Babylon in a sense became a symbolic name for Rome. And it's one way you could talk about Rome without saying the name Rome. So if you were worried about the Roman authorities saying you're saying bad things about Rome, you could say, no, I'm talking about Babylon. I'm not talking about Rome. Well, the wine of her adulteries is literally the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And this combines two ideas. We know that wine is used to intoxicate people and also to seduce them to sin, to fornication. And also wine is something that's been talked about in reference of God's wrath. So Babylon has deceived and seduced all nations by the enticements and allurements of her wealth and of her luxuries. But this cup of sensual delight is actually going to turn into the cup of God's wrath. And like I said, the actual fall of Babylon is not going to actually take place until chapter 17 and 18, but it's announced here in advance to make sure that those people that were experiencing persecution, that were experiencing hard times because of the beast, could remain faithful and be confident in the win, that in the end, they win, they're victorious, and they conquer. When in verse 9, we've got another angel. Here's a third angel that followed them, and with a loud voice warns that if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their foreheads or on their hands, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full of strength into the cup of his wrath. They'll be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. Now, he concerns himself with the fate of those who worship the beast and his image and who have his mark, because these people are the objects of divine wrath. The marks that are put on God's people, the 144,000, protect them from God's wrath, but the marks that are put on those who follow the beast, in a sense, call them out to be objects as God's wrath. And John uses two words for wrath here. One of those thumos, that the NIV translates as fury, and the other one is orge, which is translated by wrath. These two words, they kind of mean the same thing, but they have a little bit different emphasis. Orge more regularly devotes a kind of anger that kind of arises from a settled disposition, where it's orge is more like God is opposed by nature to bad things, to evil. Thumos is more of an anger that's a passionate time that kind of just arouses because all of a sudden you're angry about something. And that's kind of the way it functions in the New Testament, and not 100% so, but kind of functions that way. In fact, outside Revelation, thumos, that kind of spontaneous anger or wrath, is only used of divine anger once. Most of the time, it's orge, that kind of settled disposition. But in Revelation, we get that more vehement word used for God's wrath, the concept of fury. And it's probably because Revelation is filled with so much bad stuff going on that there's this impulsive response to the evil that comes from God. In either case, God's wrath is not like human emotions. It's that settled reaction to his holiness, to man's sinfulness and rebellion. And basically, God has to purge the world of evil and rebellion for his kingdom to come. Therefore, in one sense, God's redemptive purpose for men, his wrath is necessary, and it's a correlation of his love, because if he wants to get rid of evil, he's got to have some wrath to get rid of evil. And he wants to get rid of evil because he loves people, and he wants to give mercy on people. Really, the two main themes of Revelation are God's unswavering opposition, our people's unswavering opposition to God's salvation, how they resist it, how in spite of God's warnings, they still oppose him, and their desire to be in submission to the beast. But the other thing is that God's judgment will fall on all them in the end. Now, Revelation kind of emphasizes, or John in Revelation emphasizes God's wrath, and that's in other books of the Bible too. But in John's gospel is to a large degree a gospel of love. That's where we get John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. But right after John 3:16, and we don't read this one as often, it says, verse 36, whoever believes in the Son has eternal life, but whoever rejects the Son will not see life, for God's wrath remains on them. So you've got both things in John's gospel. You may get more of God's love in the gospel and more wrath in Revelation, but God's love is what motivates him to deal with wickedness, so that the righteous don't have to experience hardship from the wickedness, and that God's kingdom of perfect peace can come. And Paul says pretty much the same thing in Romans 1:18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godliness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Now, it's important for us to know that any presentation or interpretation of the gospel which does not include the wrath of God is really a reduction, an incomplete message. It's not the full truth about what God's plan and purpose is. There is wrath and punishment, as well as love and grace and mercy and forgiveness. Well, the torment of those who worship the beast is to be with burning sulfur. And this figure is taken from God's judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah. That is in Genesis chapter 19, and Jesus makes reference to it in Luke 17. And it's used repeatedly in the final chapters of Revelation to describe the torment that's coming on those that take the mark of the beast and worship the beast. And it may be a symbolic thing just to describe suffering and difficulties, but regardless of that, it still indicates that the suffering for those that are not followers of God that worship the beast is going to be painful, it's going to be hard, and it should not be taken lightly. The intention is really to wake up the readers and say, you do not want to experience that. You don't want to experience the eternal consequence of denying your faith and worshiping the beast. So don't do it, because you don't want to experience what they are experiencing, what's happening. And it says the worshipers, the beast, will be unable to rest night and day. So it's an ongoing persecution. It's ongoing difficulty. And in a little bit, we read verse 13, we're going to see how this ongoing night and day torment that they're experiencing is contrasted to the saints who get a rest from their labors. While the worshipers of the beast are resting right now, when the saints are being persecuted and martyred, in the final judgment, it will be reversed. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. The great test, though, is whether Christians will persevere, whether they will remain faithful, whether they will remain loyal to Jesus and not fall prey to the deception of the beast. They do this. Well, how do they do this? Well, they exercise patience, endurance, and they do that by giving their attention to God's word, which is commands, and to their being faithful to Jesus Christ. So they patiently endure by focusing on God's word and focusing on reminding themselves to trust Jesus, to have faith in Jesus. And that's why these visions are given, to remind them and encourage them to do that. The saints who remain faithful to Jesus are not only summoned to endure, but they're also given some reassurance about being blessed upon their death. And so we've got a beatitude here. When I heard a voice from heaven say, write this, blessed, that's a beatitude. Blessed are the dead who die in Christ from now on. And this is a beatitude that we like to say at funerals, don't we? Because we want to know that those who have died in Christ are going to be with the Lord. Now here it's really focusing on the people that are being persecuted and martyred, but it's really true of everybody that dies in Christ. So it's not inappropriate to use it in other occasions. It's just important to recognize that's being used here to motivate the Christians to be faithful. To die in the Lord really is the state of all believers, whether they die of natural causes in a period of peace or they die from persecution. It just basically wants to confirm and to say that if you die in Jesus, you will be blessed on the other side. You'll be blessed in eternity. And this beatitude is confirmed and explained by the Holy Spirit when he talks about they will rest from their labors, for their deeds will follow them. And here's the deeds that just basically show that they were faithful. The deeds that follow them are not denying Christ, are continuing to worship Christ, not offering a sacrifice to the beast, not taking the mark of the beast. They rest from their labor. And the labor here, word translated labor, is kind of a word that means work until you're weary, work until you're exhausted. And it's basically just saying these saints have been following Jesus. They've been hassled by the beast to the point of just simply being exhausted. But their faith, their deeds is manifest in their obedience, in their endurance, in their faith in Jesus Christ, basically assures them of the fact that they will indeed rest from their labors when they die and they go to be in the presence of Christ. All right, so we've got that going on. And those angels have talked. Now we've got another little vision going on in verse 14. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a gold crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Now, the natural way to understand this one like the Son of Man is Jesus. And we've seen other references to the Messiah coming on the clouds. And, there's some people that want to argue that it's just an angel, but I think most of the evidence lines up that it's actually Jesus. One like the Son of Man goes back to a vision of the coming kingdom of God in Daniel 7. One like the Son of Man is presented to the Ancient of Days and receives an everlasting kingdom that all peoples and nations would serve him. Jesus himself spoke of the Son of Man, one like the Son of Man in the final days, who would go out and gather a harvest. And again, he portrays the final mission of the Son of Man in the separation of the righteous from the wicked. So John is earlier likened the exalted Jesus to one like the Son of Man. So in view of all this, I think it's best to really see that as a reference to Jesus and his role that he plays in the final days. And that final day roles is basically a vision of his return to gather together the righteous and to separate the righteous and the wicked. And the sharp sickle. Now, when you see images, you see pictures, a lot of times you see something like this. And they've got that one that's on a long pole and that sharp that would be go out and used to harvest wheat someplace. But it's more likely one of these, more of a hand sickle that is held in somebody's hand. It's curved, it's sharp. It was used to harvest grain, but it was also used to cut grass, to prune trees. And then especially that would be something that would be more likely used if you're going to be cutting grapes off of a grapevine to throw it into a wine press. So it's probably more the hand one than the big long pole one as shown in this picture. So another angel comes out of the temple and calls in a loud voice to him who's sitting on the cloud, take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And so the harvesting of the earth is a frequent symbol in the Bible for the final judgment of people. And this is reinforced by the metaphor of harvesting that is used of ingathering people into the kingdom of God. Usually the kind of harvesting will talk about getting the righteous and the unrighteous. But when you get the focus on gathering the wheat, you're talking about the righteous. When your focus is on gathering weeds or the grapes, the focus is on the unrighteous. So, and we're going to see in this passage, the focus is on gathering the grapes. So it's more the focus of gathering the unrighteous for their punishment, then the righteous for their reward. But they both kind of go hand in hand. So the harvest as being ripe on the earth is saying that even though it doesn't look like it, like right now, it may look bad because the beast is winning and the beast is being worshiped. And so you might not think, well, this is not the right time for the harvest. Under God's sovereignty, that's exactly the time for the harvest. History and human affairs are not ruled by the people that are doing evil. It's when God says it's time. And often it's going to be a time when you least expect it, which is going to be a time when you think that evil is triumphing. But God is watching over history, and the hour will come in his divine wisdom when mankind is ripe for judgment. History will not get out of control. It will not go so far before what God's plan is. In God's hour, the issue will be settled once and for all. And so it basically says Christ uses the instrument to the sickle to swing over the earth. And remember, this is just a symbolic throwing because we know other places where the angels go out. He is described as the one doing it because he's in charge, even though to some degree the angels, are his agents in doing that. And again, this is one of those little short visions that's anticipatory of what's going to come. It describes what is yet future as if it's already happened. And we're going to see this gathering take place in chapters 19 and 20. Okay, then we get another angel in verse 17. Another angel came out of the temple of heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Now, the meaning of the second vision is about the end, and there's no doubt about that. It clearly and vividly pictures the judgment of the wicked in terms of the harvest of grapes. The harvest of the vine is carried out by an angel, but notice he comes out of the temple, and that would mean he's coming from the very presence of God, and he's one who serves God. In Matthew chapter 25, the Son of Man, accompanied by his angels, who are sent out to get the wicked and take the wicked to their doom. In Revelation, this end-time judgment, it's an expression of the wrath of the Lamb, though oftentimes it's also described as being the wrath of God. And then still another angel, one who had charge of fire, came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the cluster of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." So this other angel came from the altar. And remember, we taught some other altars that were talked about in Revelation. One of them was the altar of incense, and that was mentioned in connection to the prayers of the saints. And so by coming from the altar, we're basically reminded that the effectiveness of God's prayer, of the prayers of God's people and how they keep praying because they're persecuted and they want God to come and intervene. And the prayers of the saints are now being answered. There are other references to the altar of burnt offerings. And once again, this was a reference to the cry of the souls underneath saying, when are you going to do this, God? When are you going to vindicate us? So whichever altar it is, the incense offer or the offer of sacrifice, the point is basically the same, that God's people have been praying. And so finally, God is acting and intervening to bring about the judgment. There's no real focus about why the angel is described as one having power over fire. Maybe it's just because he had to do with the altars. Now, the idea of grapes, of harvesting grapes, occurs elsewhere in Scripture as a symbol for judgment. And so you can find places in the Old Testament when it comes time for judgment, it says, take the sickle and put it to the crop or put it to the grapes, harvest them right now. And so this angel swings his sickle upon the earth and gathers grapes, and they get thrown into the great winepress of God. And this verse makes it clear that the harvest of grapes represents judgment, punishment, not salvation. It's because it's talking about wrath. And this harvest is pictured again in Revelation 19:15 as the conquering Messiah who will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of Almighty God. Now, when I say that, when I talk about the winepress of the fury of the wrath of Almighty God, it might bring to mind something. If you're familiar with the Battle Hymn of the Republic, it was that song that Union troops latched onto and sang during the Civil War. It goes like this: "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on." So notice in singing this song and in Howe, who composed the song, she's linking the judgment of the wicked at the end of the age to the war that was going on in America, the American Civil War, where the South was basically experiencing the judgment of God through the fighting that was going on there. So it's interesting to see how these allusions pop up other places in literature. And it talks about they were trampled in the winepress outside the city. And here's kind of a switch, because when it talks about grapes, it's obviously talking symbolically, but now it's a bit more talking about physical death and blood flowing because of the people experiencing the judgment. And the blood flowing from that judgment was so high, it was the high of as a horse's bridle, which, you know, depends on what the horse he is, but we're talking 4 to 5 feet high and a distance of 1,600 stadia. Now, this takes place, it says, outside the city. And basically, it doesn't tell us what city is here. It's probably not important which city, because it's basically a symbolic way of saying it took place outside of God's presence. It's that judgment is going to fall on the wicked, and they're going to experience this judgment, in a sense, being separated and shut out from God. Like I said, the moving from grapes to slaughter to blood basically is talking about a military slaughter. And here in Revelation, this judgment is not something that humans do. It's not, you know, God's people take up arms and fight the beast. It's not about human vengeance. It belongs exclusively to the Son of Man and his angelic reapers. Those are the ones that are engaged in doing this. And the symbolism here is a head-on battle, a great defeat of the enemy, a sea of spilled blood. Like I said, taken literally, it would be blood about 8 feet high and 168 miles long. So some people think it shouldn't be taken literally, and therefore they try to find a symbolic meaning there. You know, 16 is 4 times 4, you know, 4 corners of the earth, 4 directions, and 1,000, you know, you multiply those together, you get 1,600 stadia. I don't know. I think speculation about those things is kind of pointless, because there's nothing clearly there that tells us whether it's supposed to be thought up as a symbolic description of the devastation or to be a literal one. Anyway, that's the end point of chapter 14. But remember, chapter 14's purpose is to kind of lift their spirits after the downer of chapter 12 and 13. The followers of the Lamb are made to realize that by these visions, that not only will they ultimately be in the presence of God when they die, and well, even if they die as a martyr, but the Lamb himself will vindicate them, because judgment will come upon their oppressors. The beast of chapter 13 employed every method at his disposal to try to get the allegiance of the entire world. But those who do not belong to the world, but belong to the heavenly realm, will resist, and they'll manifest their devotion to Jesus Christ, despite the ploys of the satanic beast and all their attempts to kind of sway them and bring about their allegiance to them. So we're going to go greater detail about these things in later chapters of Revelation. And we're getting ready to talk about the wrath being poured out. But I think John wanted to kind of reassure people that, yeah, you've already talked about some difficult times, and there's going to be some more difficult things talked about. But I want you to be confident of this, that in the end, you are victorious. In the end, if you remain faithful to Jesus, you will conquer. You will be overcomers. So let me pray for you tonight, and then we'll open up the mic so we can talk and fellowship and ask any questions you have. Father, help us to remember in the midst of our difficulties that in the end, you are victorious, that you will triumph over the evil one. Help us to have a confident assurance of that. Help us never to have our faith waver. Help always to believe that we can trust in you and that you'll work everything out good according to your plan. And Father, we pray that you'll help us to develop those spiritual muscles of endurance, of faith. Help us to take in your word now so that we will know to trust you and follow you. Help us to spend time in prayer now so that we're strong and can resist the evil one and when days get dark and when days get difficult. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So let me stop sharing.